Hello, welcome back to today's installment of Get Busy with Bradley Zink. One difference you might have noticed today was the lack of soundbite for the music. Since today's subject is dealing with the marijuana industry in California, I didn't want to have any negative blowback um, from my sponsors or it negatively adversely affect the image of my sponsors that I greatly appreciate discussing this topic. Before I get started, I want everyone to know that everything discussed today is my own personal opinions and beliefs and doesn't reflect um, or any of the opinions of my sponsors, of my show producer, or anything like that. So to begin, I would like to do a quick breakdown of what today's discussion is going to be about. It's the current marijuana industry in California, um, with the federal regulations in place currently of marijuana being a class one um, narcotic, therefore making the banking industry inaccessible to the cannabis trade. Um, you'll see the repercussions of why banking is the key to being able to reel in the reign, so to speak, of the illicit drug trade in not only America, but specifically in California. Um, you'll see the pros and cons of how things are currently set up, and then my redesign of the system and what I propose to do to better the performance of how the industry is in California to make it more beneficial um, to not only the consumers but the business owners, as well as how it can financially benefit the schools in the state and the state of California and relieve some burden on the taxpayers. So if we could first cue up the current industry pick, please. With the way that I mentioned marijuana being a class one substance at the federal level, thus making it illegal, it greatly reduces the ability for revenue prosperity in the industry. Um, but with the current system in place, there are pros. In the state of California specifically, um, each year, California generates over $400 million in cannabis tax revenue funds that goes directly to education in our state. Um, in being able to open up the banking industry for the cannabis in California, you'll see how that number can drastically increase to the tune of $1 to $3 billion annually for our public schools. Next, another pro is the local tax revenue that greatly assists cities and towns. A perfect example here in California is the city of Desert Hot Springs. As recently as 2011, their mayor pointed out how they only had $400 in the bank um, to operate that city and were on the verge of declaring bankruptcy. In 2021, last year, the city received over $4 million in tax revenue. Not only that, but out of the 29,000 residents in the city of Desert Hot Springs, over 2,300 residents work in the cannabis industry. That's almost a tenth of the population are working in an industry, which greatly increases the prosperity of what was once a financially faltering town, and now turning it around drastically. Um, Another benefit, a pro of the current industry is the cannabis industry in California is in the top five revenue in all entire agricultural industry, at an estimated production of over $13 billion a year. That's more than grapes, vegetables, and hay combined in the state. Now you can see that these numbers are very promising as is, the way that the industry is set up today. But with every pro, there's a con. And the downside of how we currently have cannabis classified in the country and the lack of banking availability for the cannabis industry is with a 95% plus cash industry, it not only creates but is exploited by the illicit trade, thus boosting crime. An example of that is without being able to deposit the funds of these establishments. Some of these bring in excess of $300,000 to $500,000 per week. Yes, that's per week. All cash, which leaves two problems with that. One of the problems is when you have an all cash industry, just like in the prohibition days, you're going to have two sets of books. You're not going to see the true sales figures, thus in turn being able to properly receive the tax revenue that could be generated by having a full cash industry. With the inaccessibility of the banking industry for cannabis, it causes the legal cannabis businesses here in California to suffer. You have to be able to pay your distributors, pay your employees, pay your rent without being able to have banking set up for you. What happens in the industry, unfortunately, is you need to find big money donors, investors, if you will, that receive the cash that's generated from the sales of cannabis in the state, and in turn giving the company money to be able to pay their rent, pay their distributors, pay their employees, operating capital, if you will. In having this type of system, you are going to have many illegal entities that will be funding these legitimate businesses, whether it be, as a lot of the press tries to push, it funds the gun running trade or the gangs. But what you need to truly understand is it's not really funding these entities as much as utilizing every opportunity that they have to be able to bring in the money necessary to operate their business in the current situation that the industry is in today, with it being a illegal substance at the federal level. As I pointed out, how the state in 2019 received over $3 billion in taxable revenue. On the flip side, in 2019, there was over $8 billion of untaxed revenue from the illegal cannabis trade. That's almost 3 times as much revenue generated from the legal trade here in California. And as I pointed out, how the schools received over $400 million generated from tax revenue of cannabis. With that additional $8 billion of untaxed revenue, that's over $1.2 billion of missed funding that would have gone to our public school system if the banking industry was open to cannabis trade here in California. Next bullet point is the heavily taxed for growers and distributors. To be able to compensate for the generation of tax revenue, on average, on an annual average, the distributors, growers, dispensaries, their tax rate increases anywhere from 3 to 10% annually. When you have such a great increase in taxes for a business, it greatly reduces the ability for small businesses to compete, which brings us to the next one. It creates a monopoly-like industry, thus hurting small business. How can a mom and pop organization growing or selling legal cannabis in the state in a, say, a 5,000 square foot facility, be able to compete with some of these larger growers and distributors that are in the 100,000 plus square foot facilities, without being able to have access to banking and relying heavily on the taxations of these businesses. It's going to greatly reduce the prosperity of a small business to be able to make it in the industry. And again, with every business in the industry and the tax revenue generation, it's more funding for our public schools, reducing the amount of tax burden on the average taxpayer by collecting more revenue in an industry that's already thriving. They project that in the state of California, at the current way that things are regulated, by 2025, sales revenue should taxable sales revenue should be generated anywhere from 10 to 12 billion. But in legitimizing the banking industry here in California for cannabis industry, we'd be able to see it as high as, well, when you take into consideration the illicit trade, we're looking at more along the lines of a 20 to 30 billion dollars in sales revenue per year, which will generate billions of dollars in tax revenue for the state of California. Next, I'd like to cover my proposals of how we can redesign the cannabis industry in California, thus creating a more prosperous industry, not only here in the state of California, but making it a blueprint for reclassifying cannabis at the federal level, thus opening up the banking industry nationwide. If we could cue up the my redesign pick, please. Okay. What I propose is a state-insured program for banking with the cannabis industry here in California, utilizing credit unions that are state-based credit unions, both countywide and statewide credit unions, insuring certificates of deposit similar to how the FDIC operates, by earmarking a $10 billion state insured program, utilizing our credit unions. You would see an influx of cash literally overnight of $10 billion flooding into our credit union industry here in California, which they would greatly appreciate. $10 billion in deposits, which will also help remove the cash sitting at the establishment. So a lot of people don't realize that one thing that the distributors, the growers, the dispensaries all have in common is, with it being a fully cash industry, each one of them has giant safes where they have to safely store their money, which causes, when you see a lot of reports of in the news of dispensaries being robbed, the first and foremost thing that they're after is not the marijuana, it's the cash. There could be in excess of hundreds of thousands, if not millions, depending on the size of the facility, in cash at any one time on site, causing that desire for the criminal element to take advantage and exploit the lack of legalized banking for the industry. On top of insuring deposits, I would like to institute a statewide utilization of a state-run point-of-sale system. This will ensure that there's only one set of books in the industry. All the approved distributors, vendors, growers, dispensary owners, all of them would utilize a state-run system, which will also create more jobs, by the way, giving the state a true look at what the sales are, um, enabling the state to better police the quantities that are being sold, making sure that it's following the policies that have been set in place, that no one is breaking the law here in the state with the industry. Um, it'll ensure that, um, like employees in the industry are also exploited for the simple fact of the banking thing, like I had mentioned. Um, there's instances where employees work 10, 12, 14-hour days, straight pay, no overtime, um, due in part because of the lack of banking availability. This would, in having a state-run point of sale system, it also would ensure that the employees are paid for the work that they're done, that they do, and ensure that they're not exploited in the industry. Um, I'd like to propose doing a reduction of state-based taxes for the growers, distributors, dispensary owners, etc., um, in enabling them to have a legitimate banking system and having the true tax revenue, um, the true revenue taxed by the state. There would be no need to rely on the dramatic increases that the state imposes in the industry for the growers, distributors, and what have you, thus opening up the market for and prosperity for these smaller businesses to be able to start out, let alone be able to compete in the industry. Um, Another thing I propose is a state imposed fee for utilizing the ability to use credit cards, or even uh, basing it off of for each delivery. Um, that state imposed fee would go directly to funding, the public school funding. Um, as an example, say for every credit card swipe, the state charges the proprietor of the business dollar fee, or for deliveries, each delivery of cannabis in the state imposes a mandatory $2.99 delivery fee that goes directly to the school funding budget, thus alleviating some of the tax burden on the voters and relying more heavily on corporations and businesses to help uh, pay for the taxes that need to be raised to efficiently run this state and to be able to meet our budget requirements every year. The final thing that would need to be um, created in this new redesign of the cannabis industry is creating a committee that is a collective of both politicians, growers, distributors, dispensary owners, um, to not only assist the state in implementing this new program, but also to act as a oversight committee to ensure that um, all the entities are following the legislation that we've put in place to be able to offer a legalized banking industry here in the state of California for cannabis. Um, Not many politicians want to get involved in the cannabis industry. It is a very debatable subject. A lot of them tend to want to stay away from the industry and continue it how it is, waiting for the feds to act at the national level in the industry. We can go ahead and bring down the pic, by the way, producer Joe. What what California has the opportunity to do, just like they did with the Compassionate Cares Act, just like they did with Proposition 420. California has the opportunity to lay the groundwork for the nation in legalized, legitimate banking Opening up the banking industry for cannabis will in turn greatly deter and possibly even eliminate the illicit drug trade, at least when it comes to marijuana in the country. It enables all factions of the industry, from the small businesses to the large conglomerates. Some of these facilities are several hundred, like I said, are 700,000 square feet facilities in a $13.8 billion production industry in the state annually. The state of California, the voters need to readdress how we are handling the cannabis industry at the federal level. And the only way to make a difference and to change things isn't to be waiting for the federal level politicians to act on their campaign promises, not to rely on them to finally get a majority of collective thinkers involved with passing legislation to legitimize banking industry for cannabis. What it's going to take is the state that's led the nation from day one in laying the groundwork for how cannabis industry should be maintained, should be legitimized at the federal level, how it can be profitable for not only the consumer, not only the public school system, like I said, that greatly benefits from the cannabis industry, not only from the state of California in the taxes that they receive, but it creates a better opportunity for the cannabis industry, for the growers to be able to expand, thus reducing the amount of illegal grow operations in the state that takes our water, creates a large crime. When you have the illegal grow operations, you also have the crime that goes with it. When you have the lack of banking, it's creating the criminal element for theft in the industry. But the greatest possibility in the banking industry is how it benefits the state of California. With the tripling, literally tripling our tax revenue in legitimizing the banking industry for cannabis, we'll see as I pointed out, we'll see the tax revenue grow to approximately $20 to $30 billion as they project by 2025. With this increase in the tax revenue generation, it enables other portions of taxes to be lowered. Because even though when it comes to a business, and like I said, government is a business, the bottom line is the key, and that's where everything is based off of. So if you have more revenue generation and taxes from the cannabis industry by legitimizing it fully, it should greatly reduce the amount of taxes that need to be collected in other aspects to be able to fund projects like infrastructure, public school system, the homeless issue, all of the facets of the issues that we see here in California can greatly benefit just from simplifying the process at the state level in banking industry for cannabis. Now I'm going to wrap it up here. I still have at least 2 to 3 more hours that I could cover on this topic, but this week I'm going to be meeting with a couple of different groups discussing my proposals for the cannabis industry and legitimizing banking. I'm going to be meeting with the San Diego chapter of Normal and the Blue Dream Democrats, as well as the Association Americans for Safe Access. Over the next 2 or 3 days, we'll be having the meetings with them, hoping to get one of the groups to be able to come on the next broadcast to discuss my proposals for the redesign of the cannabis industry in California, get their input, see what additional needs the industry would like to see addressed by the governor, by the elected officials here in the state. So hopefully next week we'll have a guest on the show. And like I said, we will dive further into the discussion of legitimizing the banking industry for cannabis in the state of California, and how we can be a groundbreaking front runner for showing the federal level how the banking industry can greatly benefit the taxpayers by opening up banking to the cannabis industry. I thank you all for joining me, and look forward to seeing you all next time on Keep Easy with Bradley Zink. Have a great day.